to engage your readers with powerful infographics with Jon Hirst. This is Ramon Rocha from Media Associates International. As you know, Lit World 2015 is just around the corner. That's this coming Sunday, November 1st. To say that we at MAI, especially the Singapore Host Committee, are also busy is an understatement. We would appreciate your prayers, but we're just glad we could still hold this webinar today. We would like you to ask questions using the chat box on the lower left-hand corner of your screen. So feel free to interact with our speaker even after the webinar. Information graphics, also known as infographics, are a way of presenting information, data, or knowledge with the use of visual tools. That's from Wikipedia. Well, a picture paints 1,000 words. Visuals are just simply powerful. Now, how can publishers use infographics as a powerful tool to engage their readers? Our speaker today is Jon Hirst. Jon is the President and CEO of Global Mapping International, or GMI International, a nonprofit focused on providing the global church with research, data, and decision resources. So let's not waste any more time. Let's give the floor to Jon. Thank you, Jon, for joining us this morning.
It's great to be with you all, and thank you for attending wherever you are in the world today. I would like to begin by just sharing a little bit of my background and how I got to a place talking about infographics. So my background actually has a lot to do with publishing. I've published several books and worked in several publishing organizations, and that led into my work I'm doing currently at GMI, which is a little different but related in the sense that GMI is in charge of stewarding knowledge for impact. So we're in charge and we work with ministries around the world to identify the data they need to be learning about, knowing about, collecting in order to make better spirit-led decisions and then evaluate the effectiveness of their ministry. And so we are always thinking about how to be more effective in understanding information, in presenting information. And just 2 years ago, GMI launched a publishing imprint called GMI Books that has done about 5 or 6 books a year now. And they're all books that take key research as the foundation, but then popularize that research into decision-making tools for ministry leaders around the world. So I'll be sharing with you a little bit more about that. But at the very same time, as we were working on the books, we also said, you know, books even in today's culture, a lot of people won't even spend the time necessarily to read research books, right? You know, it's a little bit harder for them to take that time because they're a little more dense and more detail-oriented. So we said we need an even easier way to engage people with information about mission. And that's where we really grabbed onto the idea of infographics. And we've rolled out a service called missiographics.com, M-I-S-S-I-O graphics.com. And I'll be sharing a few of those throughout this presentation. And what we found is that infographics are a powerful tool to communicate information. And they can be integrated with your book publishing in some really exciting ways. So we're going to talk about that this morning. But first, let's set the stage. Our world is full of data, and it's so full of data that we don't always know even what to do with all the information coming to us. There are 2.9 million emails sent every second. Every household, at least in America, uses about 375 megabytes of data a day. And there are 20 hours of YouTube video footage uploaded every minute. Think about the amount of data being created in our world today. it's just hard to imagine. It's hard to even know what to do with. It's hard to know how we would ever even understand all that data or utilize it in any meaningful way. But that's the world that we live in. I call it the challenge of too much information. So first of all, data is everywhere. Everywhere you look, data is being collected, it's being monitored, it's being measured. The challenge, though, is that data doesn't always neatly agree. Have you ever been in a situation where you'll have a person say a number or give you a number or statistic, and then a person the very next day uses that statistic, but does it in an almost opposite way for the opposite purpose? In America here, we're moving into a political season, and what always happens in the political seasons, I think in every country, is that each political party will take the same data coming out from the government or the economy, and they'll put out a press release saying the opposite thing, right? Data can be used in very manipulative ways. So in a world where there's too much data and it doesn't always agree, it can then be used in very manipulative ways. And then finally, data can be too specific to a particular situation. I think about the research studies that are so focused. For instance, what do dairy farmers in Canada who are over 50 think about something? Well, that data is so specific that sometimes it's hard to know what to do with it or how to use it. But that's the world that we live in. The other reality of our world today is that in many ways we're living in a post-literate world. In parts of the world we're still pre-literate. There's a segment of the world that is living in what we would call the literate reality, but there's a whole chunk of the world that's living in what we would call a post-literate reality. And that means that their main way of engaging with content is not reading words on a page, but is looking at visuals. Now, that doesn't mean they can't read, and it doesn't mean they don't read, but it means that they prefer content in other formats. And so as book publishers, we have a real challenge. We have around the world pre-literate audiences, we have literate audiences, and we have post-literate audiences. And how do we engage people all along the spectrum of where they might be in our countries in an effective way? It really is a big challenge. But I would like to propose that infographics and graphical information is one of the ways that you can do that and is a valuable tool in that process. Just a few things to note about post-literate people is there's really a failure to screen. They don't screen content well. They let it all in, like on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. They also skim. I think with post-literate people, they don't read books for the enjoyment of sitting down with a book and opening the pages and that sort of thing. They tend to skim books for information. And so it's a different kind of engagement with the content. And then I think a lot of post-literate people are consuming huge amounts of content without applying it. And we'll talk about that in a second. They're also sharing without thinking, especially in social media. All the people that hit like and share things, but maybe they haven't even read it, right? They're simply saying, I think my audience might like this, so I'm going to share it even though I don't even know what it says. So those are some challenges in living in this post-literate world. Here's an example of a visual image that communicates a ton of data with very, very few words. This is a map that shows what each country in the world leads in, and it's a bit facetious, but look quickly at your country and look at what it says for that country and how much information is communicated about some of the things that are most common in that country or that country is known for. And when I read this, I got a laugh at some of them, but some of them were right on, and I was able to get a lot of information fairly quickly. This is how a lot of people are consuming content today. The challenge we have, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. This is a taxonomy that explains how people develop in knowing and understanding content. And of course, the very base level is knowledge. I get the knowledge. The very top level is evaluation, meaning that I am able to evaluate all of what I'm hearing and evaluate it at a very deep level as far as its application in my life, my situation, and what I'm going to do next. And after knowledge, we of course have comprehension. I understand it. Application, I'm applying it. And then analysis, I'm analyzing its implications on my life. Synthesis, I'm synthesizing it into my life. And then evaluation, I'm evaluating that changed my actions and the work that I did. Well, what we're finding today is that very few people are getting past this comprehension stage in post-literate societies especially, but even among busy people in very literate societies. Very few people are getting past this point of comprehension. They're getting here and they're hitting a wall. They're not applying things because they're moving on so quickly. So the question becomes, how do we get information to them in a way that allows them to break through this wall of comprehension and begin to get some seeds of application, and then hopefully up to analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. This is the goal, but it's very, very challenging today in today's fast-moving world. What some of the keys, skills that we need to have in post-literate societies and post-literate cultures is the ability to curate content. You know, we're seeing so many more books published where it is publishing articles from a conference or bringing together different authors who wrote articles and bringing that content together in some new ways. That process of curating, just like curating a museum exhibit, curating essentially content in a book form is a very, very good way of engaging people in a post-literate world. Also, following influencers, understanding what influencers are saying and engaging their content. We use that a lot in infographic work. I'll share that with you. Obviously, reading intentionally, encouraging post-literate people to read intentionally, and to not just pick up any book, but if they're only going to read, fewer books a year, then how can they be very intentional? And then I think the final reality is know where to find everything else. In a Google world, everything can be Googled very quickly. And so a lot of the skills that we need to train post-literate readers in is they need to read certain things, but they need to know where everything else is and when to access it and how to access it. So in that reality, wanted to show you this quick map. This is a map based on the World Culture Index, and it shows the number of hours people are reading per week. And so the blue countries, you'll see, are reading the most hours, and most of those are in Asia, reading over 7 hours a week per person. Then, of course, you go to the to some of the green, the orange, yellow, which includes the United States, and then purple, which includes parts of Latin America, and especially, you'll notice, South Korea and Japan. It's important to note, different people in different cultures are reading at different amounts. What we found analyzing the data is countries with higher levels of radio penetration, then the reading suffered because more people were spending their time on radio. Countries with less access to radio and radio services tended to read more. What we found didn't change was the pervasiveness of internet and TV did not really affect the reading levels in that country, meaning the internet and TV have been fairly constant across many of the cultures. And so just the fact that people are more online does not mean they're reading less. In fact, that was fairly stable, and television remained fairly stable in the data. And so really, it's important for us to understand the countries we're in, how much they're reading, and then how to take advantage of those opportunities to engage those readers, and which readers are reading less that need more visual content. So I'd like to switch over, now that we've talked a little bit about the framework of post-literate cultures and the realities of how much people are reading or not reading, I'd like to talk about making good infographics. Ramon gave a good definition of infographics earlier on. One thing I'd like to say is if any of you are coming to Lit World, I'll be doing a whole session where we go into a lot more detail than we can in this webinar on infographics. And so if this topic really engages you, please feel free to attend that seminar. I'd love to have you there and engage with you directly. It would be a lot of fun. Well, essentially, what infographics are popularizing complex concepts. Popularizing is making it more popular, more accessible, more available to people. So essentially what we're doing is taking things that get naturally complex and taking an environment in modernity that causes us to develop more and more knowledge and then trying to make that knowledge simple. Essentially, it's an exercise in radical simplicity, a radical discipline around simplicity and how do we communicate this complex information in a simple way that a lot of people can engage in. So for instance, think about a book that you're about to publish and think about all the content and some of the data and information that's being presented. Imagine if you could create an infographic for that book that summarized some of the key points in that book in a way where anyone picking it up on Facebook or Twitter or getting it in their email could say, yeah, I have a sense for what that book is about. I kind of get it. I understand the idea. That is the goal of an infographic. It's to take a mountain of data, popularize it, simplify it down so that someone can read through, look at the data points quickly, and understand what they need to know in order to take their next action step. Popularization really comes down to three ideas. We're making it understandable, we're making it accessible, and we're making it actionable. And you'll find that through all the infographics shared this morning, we're focused on understanding, accessibility, and then what is your next step as a reader. One of the things that's important about infographics is that because we're merging the worlds of design and information in very creative and very tangible ways, we have to be really careful we design to be understood. For instance, I don't know, some of you may have seen some infographics that are so creative, they're too creative, where the design is beautiful, but the words are very small and the design is going everywhere and it's a beautiful picture, but it's very hard to understand the words. It's very hard to get the message. One of the challenges that we found in working with designers, as well as with researchers or the content people, is that the content people want to get a lot of information into the infographic. And the designers want to get a lot of design and beauty into the picture. And we have to negotiate and work with these two groups in order to present the information, but also to make it attractive and beautiful. The next thing that you need to understand in designing an infographic is you have to think in idea chunks, meaning there are chunks of ideas that you need to present. Rather than all the content swirled together, you need to present the story in pieces so that people can process it and understand it. Another thing that we've learned in developing infographics is that you have to understand where the infographic might end up. Meaning, is this going to be used in printed form in a magazine? Is it going to be in one of your books? Is it going to be used on social media? That's really going to impact your sizing and a lot of other things. We'll talk about that more in a bit. And of course, the balance between content and design. The value of infographics is been researched and proven. Infographic information is 30 times more likely to be read than print alone. 90% of what we comprehend is visually comprehended. And I thought this was so interesting. You know, publishers that used infographic data saw 12% more traffic towards their content than ones that did not. So what we're finding today is that infographic content is being read more, it's being engaged with more, and it's resulting in more engagement for publishers. And this is really important for us to understand. This is an infographic about infographics, which makes sense that there would be some of these out there. But it shares a few things that are really helpful when you're designing infographics. First, let me point to the color scheme. Look at some of the colors being used in the design of infographics. You'll notice that white is still the majority one, and that's because it is easiest to see the text when you're using white. And so white is still a key base color. Look at the different kinds of graphs used. Bar charts are still most popular, but you're seeing a lot of different kinds of charts, pie charts, these kinds that show gradations, and then icon charts that essentially use the shapes of people or images in presenting the data. On average, infographics have two sections. Remember, I talked about chunking the data. So these are just a few things that you can understand. Looking at the fonts is important. These are just some realities about developing infographics, and I thought it was so helpful to kind of see what some of the things that people are doing. Up here you have some of the topics. One thing I've noticed is because so many infographics relate to social media, if you type infographic in Google, you'll find that many of the infographics being developed are social media related because they're being used within the social media context. So here's a few key points. Show, don't tell. Fewer words. This is so hard for authors, for publishers, for us as researchers in GMI. We want to have more paragraphs and content to make our point, but you have to use as few words as possible. Secondly, you have to ask the question, do you have the right data? It's one thing to pull a statistic off the internet, random statistic, but you really need to know your data sources. You need to look at, where did this data come from? So many times when I have been working on infographics and researching, I found a data point, and then I've done the due diligence on that data point and realized, wow, this is not a very good source, or this source is really competing with this other source that I'm also using, and they're saying different things. And so getting the right data, taking the time to understand the data that you're using in your infographic is very important. Thirdly, is there a reason to share it? What's the next step? As you'll see in some of the examples we're going to use in our second side of our presentation, having a place for action points is critical. You need to give the reader of the infographic something to do next. Finally, does your text, data, and visual work all work together? One of the things that is so hard is to make the story of the infographic and the data and the design all work together in a powerful, compelling way. This is really challenging to do, and we're going to talk a little bit about it later. Also, are you adding confusion or are you changing meaning? It's one of the things that we're responsible for is to present the data in a way that presents the information correctly, and this can be a great challenge. In the end, we've all become stories. I love that quote. And one of the realities is we have to move from data to narrative in our infographic work. Essentially, you start with this information, this data, the statistics or these key points or these characteristics or these sequence of information, and you want to make it into a story, even in that infographic. And so all the work you would do to outline a book or outline an article, well, it's really a similar process when outlining an infographic. You have to say, what is this data and how will it make a difference in my context? How am I going to package it in a compelling way? What is the hook? What is my headline? The headline in an infographic is just as important as the headline in a story or an article or subhead within a chapter. Then you have to say, what is the visual theme that will hold it all together? We're going to show you some infographics, and you'll see these visual themes that go all the way from the headline and wrap around all the way to the action, meaning that just like the narrative needs to make sense and wrap all the way through, the visual theme needs to hold together throughout the whole infographic. And this is really hard to do. It's really challenging to do that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Is the infographic easy to navigate and follow? Our eye moves from left to right and in kind of a Z form, And so is the content moving in that way so that it naturally follows your eye moves? And then finally, of course, if it's a good story that really hooks people and they really get into the story and the narrative, then they're going to want to share it. They're going to want to share it with others. Is it easy to share? Have you made the file size easy to share? Have you made the size of the infographic easy to put on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or your blog or your website, etc.? Here's a little infographic that I use to illustrate the idea of narrative. Um, it's not much in the way of design, but the narrative I think is striking. They say, "We have always been at war." That's the title. So that title gets you, it grabs you pretty quickly. And then it talks about the median number of years of a war. You know, it talks about the average length of wars, the fact that the war in Afghanistan is longer than 80% of wars. And then it shows the last year without a war was in 500 something AD. And then it ends with a simple message: we've always been at war. And I thought this was a very compelling infographic. Not that the design is all that great, but the narrative is very clear. It takes you through a sequence of data and information with very little sentences or paragraphs, and it leaves you with a final clincher that strikes you. And you may or may not agree with it, but I thought it was done very, very well in how it presented that data. And all the data comes from Wikipedia, and so that source is where they got their information to create that infographic. Here's one that we've done recently, um, and it's an infographic about coffee, and the title is "Coffee Fuels More Than You Imagine." And here we've got a table with 4 people sitting around that table, and they're each drinking their coffee, and you've got the creamer in the middle. And we then go on to show how coffee has fueled missionary activity, how it fuels economic opportunity, how it fuels people in general, just the places where caffeine is consumed or coffee is consumed. And then the key point in the infographic: how coffee fuels relational evangelism, based on some of our research in church planting in the Muslim world. And then we have the action points. As you drink your next cup of coffee, pray. And then we have prayer points for people to engage with. And so here you see how we start out with a title, build on that throughout this table of coffee drinkers and the data, and then we end with the action points. And that's just an example of trying to create that narrative and bringing the visual content all together. So what we have learned so far, first of all, we've learned that it's important to find the gems. You've got to find that data that really says something. And you'll see it when you read different reports or you get different statistics within the books that you're publishing. You go, wow, that piece of information is vital. It's important. People need to understand it, and it's representative of this bigger work that I'm publishing, or representative of this bigger study. So find those gems and then build around those. Secondly, you have to be able to create and defend your basic idea. Just like with a book proposal, an infographic has to be presented and proposed in that way. You have to say, hey, we want to build an infographic on this subject. Does it hold water? That's an American expression. Does it make sense? Does it stand the test of time? Is it something that will work when it is scrutinized? The next thing we found is you have to go through a process that's fairly regimented. You need to write a script, much like you would do for a radio show or maybe the outline of a book or an article. And you have to write that script, and into that script, you have to put all the visual cues for your designer. So the script may have like little sections where you say visual input. And in that area, you're going to say, I want to use this theme, or make this sentence wrap around an image, or you have to give that sort of visual direction into the script, much like a radio producer might provide some direction along with the script of the radio program. Same with television, right? Some of those things might also apply there. We also go through a process we call validation, where the person who really understands the data will validate the script and confirm that we have represented those data points well. And that's a really important process to go through. It's really important to validate the data before it goes to the designer, because we found that if you don't get the data right before it goes to the designer, it is one level abstraction more into the process, and it's much harder to fix later. Finally, you got to hire the right designers. There's a growing set of designers out there that really love data. They understand data. They tend to be younger designers who have grown up with data around them, using social media. These designers really enjoy working with that and bringing it to life. So you need to find those designers your infographic work and stick with them. We are always looking for infographic designers, and once we find them, we work with them and cultivate those relationships so that we can continually develop their skills and abilities. And finally, we do a final phase of validation where we actually validate the design itself, because what we found is when you design the data, you can change the meaning of the data without even needing to. Meaning when you design the pie charts and the graphical representations of percentages and all these things, you can very easily change the data. So it becomes very important that you involve the people that validated the script in also looking over the design, validating the design and saying, yes, this represents the data in this infographic well, and the meaning has not changed. It comes with a great responsibility. I think there's so much data with so little analysis, and people are taking what you put out at face value. They're not doing the research or the due diligence themselves. And so we have an important job to represent this data accurately, and a responsibility to our readers, because they're not going to go beyond that graphic. They're going to look at it, they're going to get their insight, their aha moment, as we say, and then they're going to share it or move on. And so that responsibility lies with us as the publishers, as the presenters, as the popularizers of the information. So I think, Ramon, we were going to have a few questions before going into the examples.
Yes. Thank you, John. That was really very interesting and very engaging indeed. We would like to ask our audience if you have any questions at this point on infographics. I like your process there, John, the things that we need to do as publishers on how to start using infographics and what do we need to do. I'm just thinking of a publisher somewhere in Africa who may not have the ability to create one, but publishing a book full of information that could be used to promote the book using graphics. So I think that will be an application that would be very good for publishers on how to develop and create infographics.
Yeah, there
Marlene is typing.
Yeah, are there any questions?
Yes, Marlene is typing a question.
Process of infographics before we get into the examples of infographics.
Mm-hmm.
Has anyone seen
Okay,
any
we'll give you a few seconds. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Marlene. Yes, thank you. The audio is clear, and John is clear in his presentation. Thank you. Any question at this point? If you don't have any, maybe we can proceed with your presentation, John. I think we'll have more questions towards the end.
That's right. And we wanted to stop for questions just because we didn't know if the infographic concept might be new to some people, and we wanted to clarify things before getting into all the examples. But I think that the next little while of the presentation is now focused on examples of infographics and some things to note about. Okay. And that's going to really bring the content to life, I think, in a real helpful way. So, Ramon, should I just go ahead then?
Yes, please.
Okay, great.
Okay, continue.
So we'd like to share with you some different examples. Some of them are ones that GMI has done, and other ones are ones that I've picked off the internet or people that we work with. And so the first one is one that was done about a missions group who is working among indigenous and tribal people. And they're recruiting new missionaries to go to tribal areas. And so what they do here is they're essentially explaining what are the challenges that tribal people are facing. And over here on this side is the full infographic, and then on this side are some pieces of it that I've pulled out. So for instance, it says that 5% of the world's population is tribal, but it represents 15% of the world's poor. And so it's a disproportionate amount of very poor people. And then indigenous people live in every region of the world, with 70% living in Asia. That really jumps out at people. And then 20 years lower life expectancy for people from tribal backgrounds. And then this talks about some of the challenges that they have. So you see, one of the things you'll notice here is it's very simple. The data is presented very graphically, and you see these are the different blocks of information. We talked about idea blocks earlier. These are different idea blocks, but each of them builds. Now what this one doesn't do is it doesn't have much of an action point at the end. The only action point is to get a hold of the organization to find out how they can be involved. But they don't say it very clearly. One of the things that I suggest on this infographic really is if they had a call to action at the end that was more specific, it's going to make it more compelling and lead to more people following. This next one is the top 10 most read books in the world over history, really. I thought this was a fascinating one because it uses the form of books on a bookshelf as the visual theme, and then it presents the books. Now, one of the things that's challenging about this infographic is because the Bible is so much more read than all the books. Do you notice how it's the other books? It's very hard to tell really the percentages here and the difference. They become the same. And this means that the data isn't as compelling, as powerful. So this is an example of very interesting information and a very cool visual theme, but because the data is so out of proportion as far as what the data they have available, and because of how they chose to present it, it's a little harder to get the impact of it, especially down here. Now, the other thing that's a little deceiving about this infographic that I want to warn people on is the data doesn't start till here. All of this is simply showing the titles. But people, when they first read it, aren't going to think that. They're going to think that the data is really all of this going all the way up. And so here's an example of where your visual information and your data need to be better aligned or better engaged. This is an infographic that we did, taking the top 5 Bible searches from BibleGateway.com in the 10 most populous nations of the world. So you'll see here that we're saying, what are people searching for? And we're asking the question, so how are they searching for scripture? And what does that tell us about people in different countries? And then it shows that in China, with its 1.3 billion people, with 42% of the people online, 7.9% Christian, these are the top 5 Bible searches, with Matthew, John, Psalm 23, 1 Corinthians 13. And we did this for all of the top countries of the world, the top 10 most populous countries. And then down here, we talk about the analysis. We said that 9 out of the 10 had Psalm 23. 8 out of the 10 had Genesis 1. And the main Pauline or New Testament example from Pauline epistles was 1 Corinthians 13. And then we go on to apply that to the life of people in ministry as an example. Here's an infographic. The design isn't very good. This was one of our earlier ones, and the design isn't all that strong, but I want to use it as an example of story. This is an example. This is using data about where the churches in the world need to be planted and who has what role in planting those churches. So we start out the infographic and we say, do you know the most strategic way to further the church planting movement around the world? First of all, we say, let's look at the global picture together. We say, if we need one evangelical church for every 1,500 people and one for every 500 in the rural areas, so 115 urban and 500 rural, that means we need between 5 and 20 million churches. So then the question is, so who has what roles in planting those churches? We say these are the different kinds of help: pioneer help, partner help, support, encouragement, and challenging. And then this is the role that each of the countries has in helping move church planting forward. And then in the final section, we say, if these 11 movements of believers did their role that we described above, half of all the churches in the world would be planted. And so in this infographic, the story moves from, here's the amount of churches that are needed, to here's the roles that everyone has, to if these 11 did their job, then half of all the churches in the world would be planted. And so that last section is really the challenge. But it's not only the challenge to these 11, it's just these 11 represent so much of the opportunity. It's also the challenge to every country to take the role in church planting around the world. Here's another one that was done about population growth. And the story here is that by 2015, essentially, we were going to see the shift where essentially the population of the world will stop growing at the level it's been growing and will start to even out, even though there's been huge growth over the last years. Overall, we're going to see populations even out over the course of the next 50 years, so that even though the population right now, average population, is 24 years old, by 2050 it's going to be 44. So this infographic essentially talks about the fact that, as you see in this chart, even though it's hard to see a little better here, the developed world, or the Western world, has been plateaued for a long time. The global south, or the developing world, the population has been growing dramatically, but that's starting to taper off. And as more people move to the cities, and as more people have less children, that will also have a similar pattern to what we see in the developed world. And so then what we end up doing is using this window theme, say the window of opportunity to reach a larger and larger group of very, very young people will be changing. And by 2100, more and more ministry will be needed for the elderly around the world. And if more people come to know Christ at a younger age, how are we taking advantage of these next 100 years when there will be a huge young population in order to best reach the world? And so then there's the challenge at the bottom: an older world will be a less responsive world. Now, one of the things I want to note about this one that we did was we got a lot of pushback on this one, or some pushback, because there's some recent research that says that older people, or the elderly, are not necessarily less responsive. The data that says that 71% of Christians can convert or commit their lives to Christ before the age of 15, a lot of that data really represents the fact that people in Christian homes are coming to know the Lord at an early age because they have Christian parents. And there's new research being done that says that the elderly actually are in a place where they may be very responsive. And so this is an example where it's not that the data isn't true, but as we put this infographic out, we realized, well, there may be some other ways to look at this. And our take on the data may not have been the only take on the data. And this is why we have to go through that process of validating information so much. Finally, I'd like to give you some very specific applications for you as publishers, and then we'll open it up to some more questions. There's several ways that you can use infographics as a publisher. And I'd like to highlight a few of those. The first is using books as resources within infographics. So this is an infographic we did on the 3 revolutions impacting internet evangelism. So we talk about mobile technology, we talk about video content, and then we talk about social media. In the social media area, we highlighted a book written by Tammy Heim and Tony Birdsong called Sticky Jesus. It's a book about teaching people how to engage in social media, Christians how to engage in social media for evangelism. So one of the things you can do as you're thinking about how to use infographics is this is a wonderful way to plug your books in as sources on the infographic itself to get people engaging with your content. The second thing you can do is sharing data about reading trends. This infographic that we did is on some of the latest data about African readers. What are African Christian readers reading? And this is a powerful infographic. It's available on our site. I'm going to show you where it is later. But essentially, by helping your readers understand trends in reading, it helps them to then more intentionally think through what they should read. So this goes through literacy trends, then we talk about favorite authors in Angola, in Central African Republic, and Kenya. This is one of the most interesting stats in this infographic and out of this research that was done in Africa. 42% of the 8,000 people in those 3 countries that were surveyed can identify a favorite author that was African. 57% can identify a favorite author that was Christian, but only 9.5% can identify a favorite author that was both African and Christian. And so this is a great nugget of information to challenge readers with. Finally, you can actually develop infographics based on the data in your book. Actually, there's one more that I'm going to share as well, so this isn't the last one. So for instance, GMI published this book called Searching to Serve. And it is the book based on research we did on how potential missionaries use the internet to search for missions opportunities. Well, what we found in that research was there are 5 types of people using the internet to look for missions. Yes.
We're having problems with your audio.
Oh, okay. Testing.
Anyway,
Everyone.
you were, yeah, okay. Please go ahead.
Okay, it's back. What I was saying before is one of the other ways that you can use infographics is actually visually representing data from your books. So GMI published this book called Searching to Serve that was about how potential missionaries looked for missions opportunities online on the internet. And that research essentially identified 5 kinds of searchers who were looking for missions opportunities online. In the book, we walk through each profile and share stories and practical applications for how mission agencies can engage with these people. But we also created an infographic of the book content. So what we were able to do by creating this very simple synthesis of the entire book in an infographic was we were able to essentially allow people to quickly get a sense and then buy the book if they wanted more information. And I think this is a very, very powerful way to market and promote your books. Finally, there are more and more people actually creating graphical books. So this book that came out recently, The Power of Infographics, is actually a book that is completely infographic based. Of course, it's on the topic, so it would make sense that they do this. But more and more people are incorporating visual elements into the pages of the book all the way through. So for instance, I pulled out a page of the foreword of this book. And so this is the foreword for The Power of Infographics by Guy Kawasaki. And he's writing his foreword just like you would write a foreword for any book. But as you can see, as he is working through the foreword, it is visually presented as well as textually presented. And I'm seeing more and more publishers create books that have not only visual little sidebars or little pictures or that sort of thing, but actually creating books where the content and the graphics work together to present the information more clearly. So we're seeing publishers actually create books that have an infographic feel to them. Maybe it's not the entire book, maybe it's sections of the book, or key spreads in the middle of the book, or other things like that. But I think it's an important thing for you to consider how visual books might be a part of your lineup for the next year to come. Finally, I wanted to share with you that if you would like to see a lot of the infographics that GMI is developing, you can go to misiographics.com and sign up to receive them via email or get them off of Facebook, or the library is online. They're all free for you to use. And my contact information is right there. And I would be glad to interact with you if you have any questions about infographics later on, or if you are wondering about sources or information, please let us know and contact us, and we would love to serve and support you as you strive to use data and strive to use visual information in your publishing more effectively. And so I think we can move on to questions.
Thank you, Jon. Deborah has a question. Where can you find the data that is trustworthy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that, because like we said earlier, if you just find stuff online, a lot of times it's misrepresenting the information in many ways. What I would say is that there are sources that are more trustworthy than others. For instance, the United Nations data for global data about literacy or those sorts of things. Going to the United Nations site to get data on global issues is helpful. Also, there are sources of data. There are groups that do the same thing over and over again. Like, let me give you an example. Like, there's a group in the UK called Charities. I forget. It's called CAF, CAF online. And they do something called the Global Giving Index, or the World Giving Index. And every year they come out with data on the generosity of different countries around the world. And they measure that in different ways, but they come out with that study every year. Because they come out with it every year, they're more trustworthy than other sources on that subject, because they've been thinking about it every year and they've been collecting data over the years. So I think if you can find sources that have been doing it more than 1 year or one time, and if you can find reputable sources like the United Nations or like the World Bank, those are the kind of sources that you want to trust when you're developing some of this sort of information.
Thank you, Deborah. Tracy has a question. I just want to read it. I noticed many of your examples show elongated infographics designed for web pages. Do you have any suggestions on the length of infographics? In other words, how far are viewers willing to scroll to visualize the graphic? Does length affect the ability to interpret the infographic?
Yes, a very, very good question. You'll notice if you search on Google for infographics, a lot of them are extremely long. And this is because the designer or the artist or the content person was not able to simplify the content, so it ended up getting longer and longer. We started out, some of the ones I showed you, some of our earlier ones, and we started out doing longer ones, but we've really cut back on doing longer ones. We've found that the 8.5 by 11, the poster size, is really ideal for readability and for shareability. One of the things you'll find when you upload a graphic to Facebook, for instance, Facebook resizes your images. And so if you have a super long infographic, they resize it and no one can read it at all. Then you have to link them over to the web to download it. And so even though you can do them a little bit longer, we tend to recommend that 8.5 by 11 size. And then the other challenge is, for instance, you saw that when you want to present an infographic, for instance, in a PowerPoint, a lot of times you'll have to break it up into pieces because they're so long, and to get it large enough to be more readable. So we're trying to look at ways that we can get them to be the 8.5 by 11, or maybe even a longer. One of the things that we're also working with is, because so many presentations and ways that people are engaging is on high definition flat screen television panels, that longer shape where it's not vertical but horizontal design, kind of like the size of that first infographic that I did, or that we showed from IBM on how much data is in the world, kind of a longer size that way, I think is going to become a very popular size for readability and presentation.
So a one-pager with fewer words.
Absolutely. And keeping the 8.5 by 11, keeping the vertical or the horizontal approach. That's right.
Thank you, Tracy. Susan is asking, if you can't afford to hire a graphic designer, is there a source of bits of graphics you can access to put together to make your own?
Yeah, I wanted to share two resources that will help you. Number one, I think if you're looking for the graphical pieces, if you go online now to, for instance, just if you type in infographic templates into Google, many people are now selling pre-designed infographic pieces, where for just $5 or $10 or little amounts of money, you can actually purchase the pre-designed pieces, and then have your graphic design person or your layout person essentially customize them for your percentages or your information. The other thing that's happening is that you can also buy, of course, clip art and things or stock art, and then use those within infographics. But there's actually two websites, and I'm typing them into the chat. Instagram. Oh, no, sorry. Infogram. Sorry. And Pictochart. No, Infogram. Sorry. The first one is wrong. It's Infogram,
Okay.
infogr.am, and Pictochart.com.
.am.
Yep.
Okay, those are the websites that offer infographic templates.
These actually offer the ability for you to do your infographic using a WYSIWYG, which is a online tool, meaning that you can go in, you can enter your data, you can upload your image, you can organize it and design it, and you can actually design an infographic without having to have a designer at all. So those two URLs are www.infogr.am and then www.pictochart.com. And these tools are very helpful because you can essentially design an infographic without having any designer on staff. And several of our partners around the world have used those effectively to present visual data when they didn't have much budget to hire a designer.
That's very helpful, John. Thank you for the information about those two websites. Any more question? Eva, yes, see you at Lit World, and also Jacob Samuel, India, we'll see you at Lit World. Other questions for John on infographics? Can you see yourself using infographics in your books, promoting your books, or even as writers? Barbara? Okay, we'll wait. Thank you. I hope an action point, a call to action, would be to use infographics very soon.
And I encourage you that don't think that your infographics have to be as fancy as many of the ones you'll see online with designers that are spending 20 hours designing. Start very simple. Simply by integrating visual and words into your books or your promotions or different things related to your content will start to hopefully get more engagement with people who are reading less and less. And so don't, if you can't do it fancy, don't, that doesn't mean you can't start simple and that it won't be very effective for your audiences. It just means that you need to start somewhere.
Yes. Barbara said, great tools and ideas to make concepts more clear. And Tracy said, you have opened my mind to new ways we can present information in our magazine. Yeah, I'm noticing more infographics in the internet now with magazines and articles. So why not book publishers? Why can't we use infographics? So I think it's about time that we make use of infographics to promote and engage our readers with the content that our authors are creating. So thank you very much for everyone who have participated in today's webinar. Thank you very much, Jon, for opening our eyes to infographics. And it's really very interesting, and we have to apply it. We have to try it. Don't be afraid. Practice makes perfect. So start simple and then learn as you go and use it. You'll be more comfortable using it as you use it more often. Don't be afraid of the expense. There are some websites that you can access and also templates that you can access. James, are you typing something? Yeah, so thank you very much. Well, this webinar is brought to you by MAI. MAI is passionate about developing national writers so they can write quality manuscripts, books, articles written in their own language for their own people. We are also passionate about seeing homegrown Christian publishers become excellent publishers, financially sustainable, publishers developing local writers, and publishing Christ-honoring books or magazines. So visit our website, www.litworld.org. Our next webinar this November is how can authors and publishers use podcasts to reach readers? Today is using infographics. Melvin Rivera will talk about podcasts. So please register using our website for the November 24th webinar with Melvin Rivera. Well, LitWorld is just around the corner. Several of you are attending. And thank you, Barbara, for praying for us. Reaching your reader is the theme of this year's LitWorld. So 270 people have registered from 50 countries. This is going to be the biggest LitWorld so far. And we are also excited. And we're raring to go. Please pray that the writers, editors, and publishers will receive insights, ideas, and encouragement that will result in an outpouring of excellent, locally authored and published Christian materials worldwide. So if you're not coming to this year's LitWorld, please consider coming to the next one in 2018. We don't have the venue yet. We will make an announcement very soon. But if you are in our mailing list, we will certainly send you an invitation. So thank you very much for all of you. Thank you for your comments, for your encouragement. Thank you, James. Yes, I will upload this recording and I'll send it to you and even send you a copy of Jon's PowerPoint so you can review it and you can use infographics in your future projects. So thank you, everyone. God bless you all. See you next time. Thank you, Jon.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.